Aspen, Colorado, right around the corner, is well known for world-class skiing, but one lesser-known fact about this city is that it implemented one of the first carbon taxes in the country back in 2000. The next panel will explore various carbon pricing policy options that are currently in operation at the local level or proposed at the national level. Our moderator is Richard Eidlin, co-founder and vice president for policy at the American Sustainability Business Council, ASBC, which advocates for policy change at the federal and state level to support a more sustainable economy. Prior to ASBC, Eidlin served as the business outreach director for the Apollo Alliance and worked in the solar energy industry for 10 years. He consulted to the UN Environment Program, where he engaged major corporations on sustainable development programs. Sorry, 1 second. Mr. Eidlin is joined by, not by Dave Hornbacher, Mona Newton, my boss, the executive director of CORE, Dan Miller, the managing director of the Roda Group, and Lisa Tasker, a plant ecologist and principal at Ecological LLC. Let's welcome our next panel to discuss putting a fee on carbon, how and when.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to be here with you. Thank you. Bill just gave us a perfect segue, and thank you for that question about what Citizens Climate Lobby is doing. And the focus of this panel is on what's happening with a carbon fee or carbon tax. And so we're going to have a conversation with some practitioners, people who are working on this issue, both locally and then nationally. So let me give the panelists a moment to describe, just 30 seconds, of a little bit more about who they are and what they're working on. And Mona, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, I'm Mona Newton, and I'm the executive director of CORE, the Community Office for Resource Efficiency, and we're a nonprofit, and we serve the Roaring Fork Valley, which is Aspen to Glenwood Springs, and we offer rebates and grants, and a lot of them are through the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program, which I'll tell you a little bit about later. It's sometimes called a carbon tax, but it's a fee in lieu.
Good, and Dan?
Dan Miller, I'm managing director of the Roda Group. The Roda Group is a seed stage venture, a clean tech venture capital company based in Berkeley, California, and we invest in things like carbon capture, energy storage, water, and other things like that. Hard science that needs some help to move forward. But that's my day job, and then I also spend time advocating for urgent and dramatic reductions in carbon emissions, and I think the best way forward for that is putting a fee on carbon, which we'll talk about.
My name is Lisa Tasker, and I work as a plant ecologist, which is basically a biologist, and I have been doing consulting work in that area for the last 20 years. And after crisscrossing and traveling across 7 different Western states on multiple projects, looking at areas that are remote all the way to an area in downtown Denver, I have definitely firsthand seen what's happening with our plant communities and with our animals as far as impacts are concerned, not just from climate change, but obviously from our own human activities. So I have become basically that was my day job. And so I have become very active in the last couple of years. I finally decided to dive into climate change and see what solutions were being offered out there. And so I have been with Citizens Climate Lobby for the last couple of years, and that's kind of my background.
Great, good. So let me give a little bit more of a framework. There are a number of business-oriented organizations and citizen activists across the country working on the idea of a carbon tax or carbon fee. And to be clearer, these terms mean different things. So a carbon tax is explicitly designed to raise revenue. A carbon fee, the premise is that you generate revenue, but then you return it to the taxpayers through various mechanisms. So we have today sort of different points of view as to what is the most effective strategy. But what's from the American Sustainable Business Council's perspective and then Citizens Climate Lobby, and we both agree that there needs to be a price on carbon, but have a different perspective on how much money could be raised and what you do with that income. So it's critical when we talk about a carbon fee or carbon tax to look at a few things initially. One is, how do you set the price? right? So both groups think that you should set the price economy-wide, and it shouldn't be sector by sector, which is maybe more of how the renewable energy, the RGGI program would work, or the cap and trade program would work in California. So the idea of imposing a nationwide fee or tax is something that's gaining a lot of currency. Secondly, you have to ask, well, what price per ton of carbon do you set this fee or tax at? So it has to be meaningful enough to effectuate change. If it's too low, it won't change people's behavior, it won't effectuate industry and commercial behavior, right? And then the third big piece is, well, what do you do with all this revenue that's generated, right? Citizens Climate Lobby feels that you should refund those dollars through a dividend, and that goes back to taxpayers, and that thus constitutes a revenue-neutral approach. Others, American Sustainable Business Council, we're not convinced that's the most efficient strategy at the moment, although it may be the most politically viable one in the future. And so we and others think, well, it would be great to invest some of that revenue in infrastructure and in clean energy. We appreciate that there's a significant difference of opinion, and when we work as a business organization with elected officials, you know, we hear these basic questions as to how do you structure this to be most impactful, okay? So let me start, Mona, with you, given that framework, and you have sort of a microcosm of a program here in the Roaring Fork, which has tackled, you know, these basic issues of consumption, of escalating carbon pollution, and you've decided to design a program that addresses that head on with putting a price on carbon. So could you tell us a little bit how that works?
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting, the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program, and it's been in place for about 16 years now. And that's when we all started talking about climate change, and we had a very interested council person at the time, Bill Sterling, who decided that the city of Aspen needed to start doing something about it. And so what the council did, and Pitkin County also did, was to basically say, if you're going to exceed a certain amount of consumption, and there are a lot of parallels really with carbon taxes, then you'll either have the option to mitigate, which is to put solar on your house or a ground source heat pump. You can mitigate that excess carbon, or you can pay into a fund. So here's where the fee in lieu, so it's not technically a carbon tax, comes into play. And what we've seen over the years is that the tax collects somewhere about $1 million, give or take, on the given year and the amount of construction. And this applies to residential and the commercial sector in Aspen and Pitkin County. So it generates that money. And then CORE, our nonprofit, is charged with developing programs that have to offset that carbon by 2 times, and also the dollar investment. And it's been doing that for 16 years. It generated so far a total of not quite $20 million. And CORE has been able to take about 1/3 of that money, a little bit more than that actually, Lucy could probably tell me the exact number, and invest it in clean energy and energy efficiency, in rebates and grants into the Roaring Fork Valley. And what we have done last year was an analysis of how effective the program was between 2010 and 2014, because we were actually able to get some data looking at building permits and what we've seen. And it's pretty interesting because about what we've done, I think there's some real benefits. One is what we were all talking about, is market transformation. There have been a ton of jobs that have been created in the Roaring Fork Valley. We've seen a lot of adoption in renewable energy and energy efficiency. And then those people who have to mitigate or have the option to pay into the program, about 44% of them are mitigating 100% of what they are charged to offset. And of the others that have to, about 75% are mitigating some part of their requirement. So I would say it's working. Now, you can still look around Aspen, Snowmass, Pitkin County and say, oh, we have 10,000 square foot houses and 5,000 square foot houses, and the airport's, you know, full of private jets, that kind of thing. Yes, we have a long ways to go before we're really, really doing our part, but we can say that annually we can mitigate carbon for over 300 homes because of the rebates and the incentives that we can and the rebates and the incentives that we provide and the grants, and that we've also been able to not only take the dollar that is invested by somebody, and that's how we look at it as an investment, and then take and leverage that 6 times. And I think that's really important, and it really, and we talk about a lot of the theories of what it would do if we had a carbon fee in place. I can say that this truly is working in the Roaring Fork Valley.
Okay.
We've had other communities adopt this as well. We've had Telluride, we've had Sun Valley, we're actually there in the process, but Martha's Vineyard, Jackson Hole. A lot of people say, oh yes, it is only for the resort communities where there's big homes. You could actually adapt it, and I'm not saying we should go against what's being recommended by CCL, because I'm a member of CCL and other carbon fee in places. But until we get this national level, and we can start doing something at the local level that can be very meaningful. And I think that that's an important piece to recognize.
Great, good, thank you. Lisa, let me follow up on Mona's comments with a question to you about other states, other municipalities across the country, and also other places in the world where a carbon fee or carbon tax has been designed and implemented. And we've heard from a number of speakers. I think Maggie Fox earlier today questioned the viability of federal action. And Congress, while there's some progress, is slow. So there are a number of states like Massachusetts and Vermont, Oregon, others that have been looking at a carbon tax. And what's your perspective of the movement at the county level, city level, state level?
My perspective is that, I think it's really great that we have, I mean, in the EU as well, and Sweden has had some form of a carbon tax since about 1990, but it's always included in these bigger sort of energy bills, so it's hard to tease out how they have worked. And I know there are other states across the country that are trying to address this in various ways. But I do think that there's definitely a level of complexity that I think is sort of difficult for the political arena to accept, because they're all different sort of hybridized ideas of carbon fee and dividend. And I do know that it is creating some success. Like, for example, British Columbia in 2008, they basically they have the most comprehensive and transparent carbon tax in the Western Hemisphere, if not the world right now. And they had a lot of skeptics regarding the tax, but it was introduced basically by their more politically right party, actually. And it has, over the years, gained a great deal of favor because it has been successful. Economically, it has been. There's definitely some sides to it that are not as effective because they haven't really increased it. They increased it from 2008 to 2012. I believe it was by $10 per ton. So I think it sits at the 2012 level at $30 a ton. But there is discussion about increasing it, and the reason why is, like what you mentioned, is that really a carbon fee is really only going to be only really going to work if it's high enough and gives a market signal that's strong enough. And right now, they're have had somewhere between 5 and 16% reduction in their actual greenhouse gas emissions. But obviously that's something, and it's more than any of the other provinces in Canada from 2008 to 2012, which did see some declines because of the recession. Yeah.
So let me just shift for a moment. And Dan, you've been looking at CCL's proposal, right, which is $15 a ton.
Oh, no.
It's
But CC, maybe for people who don't know.
Increasing upward,
okay.
right, starting at $15 a ton and increasing. Yeah. And other proposals, like Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, starts at $42 and maybe escalating and growing from there. So describe for the audience, if you would, how this works and why it's a fee and dividend and not a tax.
So the fee and dividend, well, first of all, to start out, we're sort of out of time, right, in terms of the the last time CO2 levels were 400 parts per million like they are today, sea levels were 75 feet higher than they are now. So that's where kind of we're heading. And so we have to take urgent action. And so small carbon fees don't really, I mean, they're great and they're important, but we have to really get up high. So how is the only way you can get up to a really high carbon fee that everyone would accept? And the fee and dividend plan is that. So what you do is you put a fee on the carbon content of fossil fuels, and you charge that fee at the well, mine, or port of entry for the fossil fuel. So there's very few places you need to collect the money. And it starts off small, $10 or $15 a ton in the first year, but it goes up $10 a ton every year. So in 10 years, you're at $100 a ton. Now that raises the cost of fuel and everything else in your life. Food, transportation, and so people would not generally be very happy with that, except that with the fee and dividend, you take 100% of the money collected, every single penny, and you give it back to every legal resident on an equal basis. So you and Bill Gates get the same check every month. And it turns out, because Bill Gates and wealthy people use a far more CO2 than the average person, and because governments use 30% of the CO2, almost everybody, except for the wealthiest, get more money back in the dividend than they pay in higher prices across the board.
And this is like the Alaska Permanent Fund.
It's like the Alaska Permanent Fund that Sarah Palin would shoot you if you tried to take it away. It was done for a different reason, but mechanically it's this very...
She's no longer governor.
No,
right?
but any conservative, anyone, every citizen in Alaska loves it, right? So this is a conservative, we're talking about Republican, conservative ideas. Right. This is a very conservative idea. It uses market forces to correct a problem. It doesn't pick winners or losers, and it doesn't grow government at all. But I should add, there's another part to fee and dividend, to this carbon fee. Because you're going to say, well, it sounds great, I love it, but it's going to hurt American business because our products could be more expensive. And you know what? And it wouldn't even matter anyway, because if we cut our carbon footprint to 0 tomorrow in the United States, we're still screwed as long as India and China keep growing theirs. And that's true. So there's a second part to fee and dividend. And that is you put a border duty on products coming from countries that don't have their own price on CO2. And that, first of all, protects American industry, but it also faces those countries with the following question. Do I want to send lots of money to the United States, and by the way, to every other country that's part of this, or do I want to keep it myself? And of course, they're going to want to keep it themselves, and they're going to do it. And remember, China's ahead of us on carbon pricing, and the EU already has it. So if the three of us got together and started this border duty, the whole world would be in place in a couple of years. Okay. And that is what is so critical. And I want to, back to your, so what else could you do with the money? You could cut taxes. But if you cut taxes, it's the most regressive thing you can do. You're basically taking taxes away from corporations and putting them on the poor. Because a carbon fee, to be honest, is going to raise the price of everything. And so you need, so that's regressive. But the fee and dividend corrects for that. But the other reason why it's superior to cutting taxes is that if you cut taxes and you don't give the money back, well, then you can get up to $30, $40 a ton. But you're never going to get up to that $100 a ton and beyond that you need to really make dramatic reductions.
Yeah, so that there are a number of economists, both conservative and liberal economists, who feel that a taxpayer refund is actually not the most stimulative mechanism at all, and that it would be smarter and more impactful to reduce corporate income tax and reduce payroll income tax. And so that is seen as possibly a more efficient strategy to stimulate investment, stimulate R&D, and have a larger impact. So, Lisa, do you want to say anything?
Well, okay.
Dan, why don't you go? Sorry.
So,
go ahead.
well, as they say, cap and trade, by the way, is theoretically the most efficient thing to do. But as they say, it's theoretical, and in practice it doesn't work, and the same is true. It meant the transparency and the simplicity of fee and dividend, where everyone's getting the same check, they all see it, they know that it's working and it's not cheating or all this stuff. That is very important to get the public support behind anything you do.
Yeah, so there's a political calculus here.
Exactly. That's the politically expedient way of trying to sell this. But yes, I mean, there are a lot of people, and Bob Inglis, for once, for one,
Bob actually opposes the idea of
he is a former congressman from South Carolina, and was basically voted out of office because he
believes
was
in climate
Republican and stated that he, climate change was real. So Yes, and a lot of economists do say that yes, you do need to tweak this somewhat. And in British Columbia, they have given some taxes back to corporations and businesses, and yet the economy has still done very well. So it still has not been perceived as a regressive tax, even though that is tweaked somewhat. So.
Okay, yeah, Mona, did you want to say something about that?
Well, I think it's just really important to note that part of me says we just need to get this carbon fee and dividend in place and going, because we can talk about it a lot and we can sort of figure out, and I know the devil is in the details, but it's really important to act. And I think everybody agrees in this room and has talked about this morning, we need speed and we need scale.
Yeah.
And that's what's
yeah,
really important.
Yeah, let me just mention something about speed and scale. So the American Sustainable Business Council and Business Climate Lobby, which is part of CCL, and a number of other business groups, will be organizing an event in DC in April, and we'd like to work with AREDAY on this to bring 1,000 businesses to Capitol Hill to lobby. So when we talk about messaging, and we've discussed this in a number of forums here today, you know, our experience is the most impactful messenger is that of the business person. Business people have immediate credibility with elected officials. They're not seen as some crazy-eyed environmentalist. I love environmentalists. I am an environmentalist. But the business community is able to convey the risk associated with climate change in a really impactful way. So when Mona talks about scale, there really is an imperative to do this, and our plan is to bring hundreds, if not 1,000 or more, business leaders from small, mid-size, and large companies to DC in April. Lisa, yeah.
Yeah, there was a woman who said she just came from CCL, and my understanding is we got some information. I don't know if it's been mentioned here, but supposedly they announced that they would like to get a carbon tax through the federal government in the next year. They're like, they made this great announcement. And
Seems ambitious.
It's incredibly ambitious. They have decided that it's just they're tired of messing around. They're tired of the rhetoric. They're just going to try as hard as they possibly can.
And just to go back quickly, because Bill was asked about the Gibson resolution. So Congressman Chris Gibson is from upstate New York, and he had sponsored a resolution, and he had 13, I believe, members within the Republican caucus sign on to that. So there is growing interest in the Republican caucus for this idea. I would also note that last week, the House voted overwhelmingly to oppose the idea of a carbon tax. And that was a very interesting message, because that is not something that's been actively talked about from Secretary Clinton, and certainly not from Mr. Trump. So I think the House was already seeing the writing on the wall that there is political support, and it was sort of a preemptive strike to make it clear that the majority in the House right now is not in favor of that.
So one of the things that people should know that Regional Economic Models Inc., a sort of conservative think tank that does economic modeling, looked at the fee and dividend plan that I described. And they said that over the next 20 years, this plan would create 2.8 million jobs, grow GDP by $1.4 trillion, and cut emissions by over 50%, and by the way, save 200,000 lives from less pollution. And this does not assume any savings from impact from climate change. So getting back, it doesn't assume climate change is real. It just would do that kind of positive impact. So if you are conservative, you would think that you would actually like to grow the economy, create jobs, reduce pollution, and cut emissions. It's a good thing to do.
Right. And then, a key factor is not growing the government and not expanding the regulatory environment, which we've heard from our conservative colleagues as key criteria. Mona, and just a time check for everyone, we have about 4.5 minutes, I see. So, Mona, go ahead.
I'd like to follow up on Bill Becker's comment earlier. And one of the things that has happened locally, and I'm not sure if Lisa was going to mention this or not, but we have local CCL chapters. And again, I'm wearing a couple different hats. And what we have asked our state, our county commissioners, and city councils to do in our local area is to support a resolution supporting the CCL fee and dividend, a concept, and then we forward that to our representatives and our congressmen's offices. And I think that's really important to all of the points that we're trying to make. It says our government officials are asking for it, and they are elected officials as well. So I think it's very important. And a lot of the other things we do is we write letters, and Conservation Colorado constantly asks us to write letters to our congressmen and to get our opinions heard. And while I know business people are very credible, they suppose when we meet with our congressmen or their staffers, they do tell us that they read the letters that they receive from their constituents, and they are willing to listen to them. So I think it's really important that all of the voices are heard, or everybody speaks up and tells Congress that we need this climate, we need a carbon tax, and we can't really keep waiting any longer for them to dither around.
Right. Lisa, 30-second
partially from some of our local efforts, we have a representative that now has a Democratic challenger, Gail Schwartz, and part of the reason why she ended up doing that is because of the local chapters of CCL, our efforts of going into Scott Tipton's office, Corey Gardner's offices over in Grand Junction, and another CCL person, Ruthie Brown, who runs the Aspen chapter with Mona. She basically is very good friends and has family members with Gail Schwartz, so she talked her into running, and so which is very exciting because, for one thing, he talks about coal jobs, and she was quoted in the paper the other day. She said, well, 300 coal jobs versus 44,000 jobs in the skiing industry in this state is a little bit of an issue for her.
Right. Dan, any final thoughts?
Well, I think going for a carbon fee very quickly in the next year is really important, because whatever plan you have, starting it now versus starting 10 years from now, you will have a very different outcome. As I said, CO2 lasts, it's essentially forever. It's not like water pollution or air pollution that gets better when you finally stop doing it. It stays, it's like mixing ink with water and then deciding you don't like the ink in the water anymore. Well, tough luck, okay? So and again, this is something that everyone would like if it's done, right? If it's done the right way and people are getting a check back. By the way, I'm not actually a member of CCL. I'm one of those business folks who advocate for it separately, and everyone here should advocate for it too, because it's the #1 thing that will push the renewable energy economy. It will transform our economy. I'm in clean tech investing. There's not a lot of people doing clean tech investing, not enough. This will change the world. You'll see investment and innovation and deployment just happening amazingly rapidly if there's a growing price on carbon.
So just thank you, and just a few thoughts here to wrap up. On Capitol Hill, what we hear is there's a real appetite for corporate tax reduction. So it may be, for better or worse, that the outcome here is we'll trade you corporate tax reduction for a carbon fee or carbon tax. So that may be one thing that happens, and I'd encourage you all to keep an eye out for that. That may not be your optimal trade-off, but that may be the political reality of it. Secondly is there are a number of members of the House and the Senate in the United States Congress that are really working on this, and as Mona and others suggested, it makes a lot of difference if you participate. And third is, and Lisa mentioned about coal, but one of the really interesting aspects of looking at a carbon fee or tax is how do we help communities disproportionately impacted by a tax or fee in which electricity rates will likely go up, and certain fossil fuels will be adversely impacted and fall out of favor in the marketplace. It's no doubt that's going to happen. So we and others have been thinking about how do you help communities in Montana and Colorado and West Virginia, in Kentucky, et cetera, transition towards a new era in which their fossil fuel is not as important. And lastly, with just a recognition to Rod, who's going to talk to us in a moment, I think it really is important that we find some common language here, and that we recognize that when we say fee, when we say tax, we may mean different things, but ultimately we're collaborating on finding a way to deal with climate change. That's right. Good. Well, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.